My name is Alana Ward, and 6 weeks ago, I was living a life so ordinary it barely left a footprint. I taught piano lessons out of a modest music studio, counting coins at the end of each month just to keep the lights on in my tiny apartment. I wasn't famous, wealthy, or powerful. I was simply getting by. Then, just after midnight, one phone call split my life clean in two. The voice on the other end was calm, official, and devastating. My grandfather, Thomas Ward, had been killed in a brutal highway collision caused by a drunk driver. To the world, he was a legendary billionaire industrialist. To me, he was the only person who ever truly saw me. By morning, nothing felt real anymore. The following day, we were summoned to his attorney's office. I went expecting paperwork, condolences, maybe a modest inheritance. What I walked into instead was the moment my family turned into strangers. My grandfather had left everything to me. Every company, every property, every account. $7 billion. The silence in the room shattered instantly. My mother's face tightened with fury disguised as shock. My father rose from his chair, shouting that it was impossible. My brother slammed his fist into the table, demanding to know where his share was. They said the fortune belonged to them. I answered with a single word: no. That word cost me my family. By nightfall, I was standing outside the house I grew up in, holding a duffel bag while my father slammed the door behind me. But tucked inside my coat pocket was a small brass key, one my grandfather had given me months earlier, the key to his estate. Before everything changed. Before the money, before the betrayal, my life was quiet. I was 26, teaching piano to beginners who struggled through scales, and children whose faces lit up the moment they played their first song correctly. I drove an aging car, lived paycheck to paycheck, and spent most evenings practicing alone. And I was content. My parents never understood that. To them, success meant power and prestige. My father, Martin Ward, spoke only in numbers and titles. My mother, Elaine, lived for appearances and social status. My brother Logan was the golden child, reckless, entitled, endlessly forgiven. I had always felt like a guest in my own family. The only place I ever felt at home was with my grandfather. His mansion wasn't intimidating to me, it was warm. We baked together, played chess by the fire, and sat side by side at his grand piano while he reminded me that wealth was a tool, not a soul. Money can buy an instrument, he used to say, tapping his chest, but music comes from here. He listened when I spoke. He never tried to change me. And now he was gone. The will reading. 2 weeks after the funeral, his attorney, Samuel Klein, read the will. When my name was spoken as the sole heir, the room erupted. My father accused me of manipulation. My mother called me irresponsible. My brother demanded money for his latest failed venture. Then the attorney played a video. My grandfather appeared on the screen, calm and resolute. He spoke of greed, of disappointment, of love misplaced. And then he said the words that changed everything. She lives with integrity. She didn't love me for my money. She loved me for me. There was no appeal. The will was airtight. That night, my parents demanded I sign everything over to them in exchange for a generous allowance. They offered me 10%. They called it loyalty. I called it betrayal. When I refused, my father gave me 30 minutes to pack. Cast out. I left with only what I could carry: clothes, a photo of my grandfather, and the brass key. The drive to his estate felt endless, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When the iron gates opened, it felt like crossing into the only place left that remembered who I was. Inside, someone was waiting. Jonathan Hale, my grandfather's longtime estate manager. He told me the truth. My grandfather had prepared for this. Security, legal protection, witnesses, evidence. He knew his family would turn against me, and he built a fortress around me anyway. The confrontation. They came 2 days later. My parents, my brother, their lawyers. They demanded entry. What they didn't expect was the room full of people standing beside me. The attorney, a business partner, an investment advisor, a retired judge, and security footage showing them stealing from the estate days after the funeral. When the footage played, the room went silent. This time, they were the ones with nothing to say. The judge made it clear they had no claim, no leverage, no future here. When they left, it wasn't in victory, it was in defeat. Building something new. I didn't keep the money for myself. Within 3 months, I launched the Thomas Ward Foundation, dedicating billions to education, scholarships, and community programs. I learned the business, protected the employees, honored the legacy. The mansion filled with laughter again, not with blood relatives, but with people who cared, people who chose me. I thought the worst was over once my parents walked out of the mansion that day. I was wrong. Power doesn't disappear when it's denied. It changes shape. And my family was just getting started. The first attack didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly. 3 days after they left, my bank accounts were frozen. I stood in the study, phone pressed to my ear, listening as my bank manager spoke in a careful, rehearsed tone. "There's been a legal request placed on your assets, Miss Ward, a temporary hold while a claim is reviewed." A claim. From my father. I felt my stomach drop. "They can't do that," I said, my voice shaking. "The will is finalized." Samuel Klein was already beside me, his jaw tight. "They're trying to bleed you with delays," he said once I hung up. "They know they can't win outright, so they'll exhaust you instead." I exhaled slowly. That was when I realized something important. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about control. The smear campaign. Within a week, the headlines started. Billionaire heiress with no experience takes control of empire. Family claims granddaughter manipulated dying tycoon. Questions rise over will of Thomas Ward. My face was everywhere. Articles called me naive. Commentators labeled me unqualified. Anonymous sources hinted at manipulation. Anonymous sources who sounded a lot like my mother. I sat at the breakfast table, laptop open, hands trembling as I scrolled. Jonathan placed a cup of tea beside me. "Your grandfather warned us this might happen," he said gently. "Reputation warfare. They want to break public confidence." "And if they succeed?" I asked. "Then investors panic, employees fear layoffs, the empire weakens." I closed the laptop. "No," I said quietly, "that won't happen." 2 days later, I did something no one expected. I called a press conference. Samuel nearly dropped his pen. "Are you sure?" he asked. "This is risky." "I've spent my whole life being quiet. It didn't protect me then, it won't protect me now." The room buzzed with reporters when I stepped up to the podium. Cameras flashed, voices shouted questions. I took a breath and spoke. "My name is Elena Ward. I was chosen by my grandfather not because I'm perfect, but because I'm honest." The room stilled. "I didn't ask for his fortune. I didn't manipulate him. I loved him, and I will honor him, not by hiding, but by leading." I announced the foundation publicly. Education, employee protections, transparency audits. By the time I stepped away from the microphone, the narrative had shifted. They expected fear. They got resolve. The betrayal that cut deepest. That night, my phone rang. It was my brother, Logan. I almost didn't answer. Almost. "Elena," he said softly, too softly. "We didn't want this to go so far." I stayed silent. "They're pushing Dad, the lawyers, the advisors. He's spiraling. If you just give us something." "No," I said. A pause. Then his voice dropped. "You think Grandpa loved you more, but all you did was replace us." That one hurt, because a part of me had wondered the same thing. I didn't replace anyone. You all walked away." He hung up. I stared at the phone long after the line went dead. That was the moment I finally let go. The final strike. 2 weeks later, the lawsuit was dismissed. Not quietly, publicly. The judge cited overwhelming evidence, bad faith claims, and attempted coercion. My parents' names were dragged through court filings. Their social circle vanished overnight. The same people who once toasted them at galas suddenly stopped answering calls. Money opens doors, but reputation decides who stays inside. Standing tall. On the anniversary of my grandfather's death, I held a private ceremony at the mansion. Employees, scholars, foundation partners. I played the piano myself. My hands trembled, but I didn't stop. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't playing to be approved. I was playing to be heard. And as the final note faded, I knew something with absolute certainty. They tried to destroy me. Instead, they forged me.
Power doesn't announce itself when it arrives. It reveals itself when everything else falls away. And by the time my family realized that truth, it was already too late. The call that changed everything. It came late at night, a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Old instincts die hard, but something made me answer. "Elena?" a woman's voice asked, trembling. "This is Marianne Ward." My mother. She hadn't called me by my first name in years. I closed my eyes. "What do you want?" I asked. Silence stretched between us before she spoke again. "Your father collapsed tonight. Stress. The doctors say his heart couldn't take it." I felt the words land, heavy but distant. "I'm not calling to ask for money," she added quickly. "I'm calling because he keeps asking for you." For a moment, the world tilted. Every memory of slammed doors, shouted accusations, and cold indifference surged forward. Then I thought of my grandfather, and I knew what I had to do. The hospital room. The room smelled like antiseptic and regret. My father lay in the hospital bed, thinner than I remembered, his once commanding presence reduced to silence and machines. When his eyes opened and found mine, they filled instantly. "Elena," he rasped. I stood at the foot of the bed, hands folded. "I didn't come to negotiate," I said softly. "I came to listen." His voice cracked. I was wrong. I thought power made me a father. I thought control meant love. Tears slid down his face. I lost everything trying to win. I said nothing. Some apologies don't need answers. The last request. 2 days later, he passed away quietly. At the reading of his will, there were no surprises, no hidden assets, no redemption clauses, only debt, and one final request, that I attend the private burial. I did, not for him, for myself. As the dirt covered the coffin, I felt something unexpected lift from my chest, not forgiveness, but freedom. The letter he never sent. Weeks later, while organizing old documents, Jonathan found an envelope tucked inside my grandfather's safe, addressed to me, written years before his death. "Elena," the letter read, "some people will never learn to love without owning. If that happens, don't carry their failure as your own." I cried harder than I had in months, because finally someone had named it. A family of choice. The foundation expanded faster than anyone predicted. Scholarships doubled, community music schools opened in cities my grandfather had once visited quietly. At the grand opening of the first music academy, a little girl tugged on my sleeve. "Are you the piano lady?" she asked. I smiled. "I am." She grinned. "I want to play like you one day." And in that moment, I knew this was the legacy. Not money, not power, but possibility. The final scene. One evening, as autumn settled over the estate, I sat at the grand piano, alone. The mansion was quiet, but not empty. Laughter echoed in memory. Warmth lingered in the walls. I placed my hands on the keys and played the piece my grandfather taught me as a child. Not perfectly, but honestly. As the final note faded, I whispered into the silence, I chose dignity. And for the first time in my life, that choice was enough.
The world didn't stop after everything ended. It softened. That surprised me more than the battles ever did. When the noise faded, months passed. The lawsuits were gone. The headlines moved on. The cameras stopped waiting outside the gates. For the first time since my grandfather died, my life wasn't defined by conflict. I woke up without bracing myself. No emergency meetings, no hostile emails, no threats disguised as apologies. Just quiet. And in that quiet, I finally heard my own thoughts. What money couldn't buy. One afternoon, I visited a small community center funded by the foundation. It used to be an abandoned warehouse. Now it held upright pianos, worn floors polished by practice, and kids arguing cheerfully over whose turn it was to play. I sat in the back as a boy with shaking hands attempted his first recital piece. He missed notes. He stopped. I expected him to cry. Instead, he looked up and laughed. "Can I try again?" he asked. The room applauded. In that moment, I understood something my family never had. Success isn't perfection, it's permission. The last tie cut.